Then Satan stood against Israel and incited David to number Israel. So David said to Joab and the commanders of the army, "Go number Israel from Beersheba to Dan, and bring me a report that I may know their number." But Joab said, "May the Lord add to his people 100 times as many as they are. Are they not, my lord the king, all of them my lord's servants? Why then should my lord require this? Why should it be a cause of guilt for Israel?" But the king's word prevailed against Joab. So Joab departed and went throughout all Israel and came back to Jerusalem. And Joab gave the sum of the numbering of the people to David. In all Israel there were 1.1 million men who drew the sword, and in Judah 470,000 who drew the sword. But he did not include Levi, and he did not include Benjamin in the numbering, for the king's command was abhorrent to Joab. We are in the section of 2 Samuel we're calling the epilogue of the king. It's not necessarily in chronological order. That was true last week. It's true tonight, but the author of Samuel is wrapping up David's life in this kind of epilogue and handpicked stories by the Holy Spirit, and this is one of them. Here's what's important to note. Of all the blunders and all the failures and all the sins, all the treacheries that David committed, in God's economy, this was the worst offense. We probably would not put it in the number one slot, right? But God did, and that's really interesting. So chronologically in our story, assuming that it's sort of chronological, which is probably not, the coup is thwarted, right? Absalom is now dead. David's back in power, and he's at the peak of his power. If David had a peak of power, this is it. He's at the height of his popularity, the height of his strength. His enemies are subdued. Right? The Philistines, the coup, all of that, everything is kind of in peace. It's kind of a lull. It's quiet. There's loose ends of justice that are being tied up. We saw that last week with the Gibeonites. Remember that? That seems like a long time ago. And riches and offerings are pouring into the temple. Just mounds and mounds of cash and materials and supplies, right? This is kind of what's going on in the kingdom. And that's when you cue the villain, Satan, by name. Dun, dun, dun. Right? Satan fanned a flame in David. He fanned a flame. He's tempting David to do something he already was inclined to do. What was David inclined to do? Take a census. David took a census, okay? What's the big deal? Why does God rank this in the number one slot of horrible things that David has done? Here is the law. There's a Levitical law about the census. It's the census and the tax, okay? Man could not number what did not belong to him. That's a law. Man could not count in pride something that it doesn't even belong to him. Exodus 30, the whole section is verse 11 through 16, so write that down. This is just the opening lines, but you can go back and read it later. It says, when you take the census of the children of Israel for their number, then every man shall give a ransom for himself to the Lord. When you number them, that there may be no plague among them when you number them. Isn't that interesting? When you number the people, and sometimes God called for a count. When that happened, it was really a census and a tax. For every person that you counted, they would have to bring a tax to the temple. Okay, that's just how God designed it. Don't ask me. I didn't make the rule. That's the rule. Okay? But God calls for the count. Question, does David own Israel? No. Who owns Israel? God owns Israel. That's right. No census ever could be taken unless if it was taken in the right way, where there was a tax. And it's because the Lord called for it, and everybody was accounted for, and they brought their tax money to the temple. This was totally out of line. And if you didn't do it the right way, what happens? There's a plague. That sounds familiar. There's a plague. Look at verse 1 again of our text. 1 Chronicles 21. Look at verse 1. It says that Satan incited David. Did you guys see that? Incite. It's a really interesting word. It means this. I've got it on the board. It means to allure. It means to instigate. It means to entice. It's the MO of our enemy, right? I mean, look at those words. That's our enemy. That's what he does. He allures you. He entices you. He instigates. He's an instigator. And then he turns around and points a finger at you because you did it, right? That's who he is. Satan incites David. Here's the thing. The question is, if you read 2 Samuel 24 versus 1 Chronicles 21, it's a little confusing on who is doing what. But it's not really confusing at all. So I hope you are not confused. Temptation is part of the game of life. When did temptation creep into our existence? Anybody? The garden. There was literally 2 people on earth, and here it comes, right? And what does Satan do? He incited Eve to eat of the fruit of the tree. He allured her. He enticed her. He really deceived her, right? Oh, God didn't really mean that. And she got so discombobulated, she started adding to the things that God said, and now she's really off, right? Temptation. Here's the thing. Once sin was introduced into the world, now we're under that law of sin and death, and everybody's born into this sin nature where we are tempted, okay? And plus, we have free will. Dang it. It's like a trifecta of trouble, right? You got the enemy alluring you, plus we have a sin nature and free will. That's a lot, right? That's a lot to combat. Here's the thing. The Lord cannot rescue us from temptation itself. It's here. And Satan is the prince of the world. And that's his job. His job is to mess with us and tempt us with things that are already tempting. Here's the thing. I feel very liberated. I feel very righteous when there's a plate of fish in front of me. I am not tempted. I can say with 100% accuracy that I have never fallen into the sin of eating fish. It's nasty. But if somebody puts dark chocolate in front of me, I am toast. You know what I'm saying? Here's the thing about the enemy. He's an observer. He's a detective. He knows us. He watches us. He's the accuser. He's got to have some data. He knows what is already tempting to us because of our nature, and then he throws it in front of us to allure us. And what tempts me may not tempt you. You may not like dark chocolate at all. He's not going to try that on you. You may love halibut. That might work. Do you see what I'm saying? He knows how to tempt us with what we're already inclined to like. That's why he's tricky and crafty and really good at it. God cannot rescue us from temptation, but he does equip us to overcome temptation. There's a couple verses. I think these were in your homework. 1 Corinthians, if you don't have them, write them down. 1 Corinthians 10:13 says this: no temptation has overcome you that is not common to man. Even Jesus was tempted. Don't forget that. The temptation is not the sin. It's accepting and acting on the temptation that's the sin. Even Jesus was tempted because he had a nature. He was hungry. He was tempted, right? Lots of things. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability, but with the temptation that he cannot remove, he will also provide you a way of escape, you see, that you may be able to endure it. He's like, look, I can't take the temptation away, but I can give you an escape hatch. You can choose to take it every time. You see, that's just the truth. Turn to James chapter 1. James chapter 1, flip over there, keep your hand in Chronicles. We're coming right back. James chapter 1, verse 12. Blessed is the man who remains steadfast under trial, for when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life, which God has promised to those who love him. Let no one say when he is tempted, I am being tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted with evil, and he himself tempts no one. But check it out. Each person is tempted when he is lured, enticed, instigated, incited. All the same word of our text. Lured and enticed by his market own desire. You guys see that? There's several things that are helpful in this little passage that helps us decode the 2 Samuel, 1 Chronicles trouble of who tempted David to do this. How did David get in this scenario in the first place? First of all, does God tempt us? No, so you can take that off your list. He doesn't tempt us. But he allows us to be tempted. Why? Free will? Why? Because Satan's allowed to mess with us? All kinds of reasons. He can't take it away. Temptations in the world, right? He doesn't tempt. He allows the temptation. But check it out. It says that we are lured and enticed by Satan's desire? No, by our own desire. Fish or dark chocolate? It's our own desire, but Satan is smart, and he knows what our own desire is, and he uses that against us. David had it in his mind to number the people, and Satan said, sweet, I can totally play on that. And it said that Satan incited David to number the people. Does that mean that David was a puppet and forced into sin? And he's like, Satan made me do it. No, you did it. Satan shoved you in a direction that you were already going, and God did not tempt you to do it. So David takes his census. Question, what is Job's response? Once again, Job is on the right side of the fence. You guys see what I'm trying to say these last couple weeks? He's really a conundrum. He doesn't like this. He knows it's wrong. And he asks David, what's your motivation here, buddy? What are you doing? You know that these people all belong to the Lord. You know that he would multiply your numbers. Why are you doing? Why are you counting? But Joab's like, fine, whatever. And he's out doing the bidding of the king again, a little disgruntled and not quite all the way through. That's okay. How many people did he count? A lot. It's a massive army. Again, the two texts have two different numbers. Don't let that mess you up. 2 Samuel was written much closer to the time frame than 1 Chronicles, and we're not really sure who was included in each count. There could be all kinds of variations. People on active duty, people not on active duty, people who died in battle, maybe somebody who didn't. There's all kinds of counting that could go on. Don't let it freak you out. David wants to know how strong his army is, and that's the point. Chronicles has it at 1.5 million Navy SEALs. Question, why was the census so grievous? Why is there an entire law against it if it's not done right? One word, pride. One word. It's pride. It's been called the greatest sin. It's been called the essence of all sin. You could kind of get there. It's listed first in the list of the 7 deadly sins that God made a list, and pride is number 1. Okay? It's the downfall of leaders. It's the poison of ministries. It's the destruction of kingdoms. It's at the helm of anarchy and evil revolutions. Pride. God hates pride. 7 things God hates, Proverbs says. Number 1, pride. Hates it. Pride. Why? The character of pride. The mindset of pride, the way of pride is the antithesis of Jehovah. It is the exact opposite of the nature of God. Pride. His greatest act was the antithesis of pride when he showed great humility, taking off his crown and his robe and his deity and coming to earth in human form. That's God, you see. Pride has no place. Once upon a time, before earth hung on nothing, there were battle lines drawn in heaven because of pride. Isaiah chapter 14 tells us what happened in the heavenly realm when Satan stood up with his minions on one side of the battlefield and God with his angels on the other side of the battlefield, and Satan said, "I will," about 8 times. I will be king. I will ascend above heaven. I will be as God. I. And he got chucked out. I. Pride. It split heaven in half. It's the first sin. It's the origin of sin. You see, pride. Later, there was a superpower named Babylon. And King Nebi, he's at the top. King Nebi, remember him? King Nebuchadnezzar, he's at the top. He was ruthless. He was a battle strategist. He conquered the known world, including Judah. And he had one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, the hanging gardens of Babylon. And he's up on his balcony and he's looking out and he says this as he's staring at his nice plants. Is it not the great Babylon I have built as the royal residence by my mighty power and for the glory of my majesty? What happened to him? Moo. 7 years. 7 years in the field. Pride. It took him down, and it was ultimately the fall of Babylon because some puppet king got in there and completely ruined the power of Babylon, which thanks be to the Lord, because Persia walked right in and let the captives go. Remember that? 1 Chronicles 21, back to our text. David, in pride, is looking around at all of his kingdom. Look what I have done. I built this up from 400 losers in a cave to 1.5 million Army SEALs. I'm awesome. Remember the 400? That's how it started. And he's looking around, taking glory for himself. Look at verse 7. But God was displeased with this thing, and he struck Israel. And David said to God, I have sinned greatly in what I have done this thing. Now please take away the iniquity of your servant, for I have acted very foolishly. And the Lord spoke to Gad, the mouthpiece hired for this gig right here, David's seer, saying, Go and say to David, thus says the Lord, 3 things I offer you. Choose one of them that I may do it for you, like a really bad genie. You get 3 wishes. You get to pick one. So here's your choices, it says. 3 years of famine, 3 months of devastation by your foes while the sword of your enemies overtakes you, or else 3 days of the sword of the Lord, pestilence on the land, with the angel of the Lord destroying throughout all the territory of Israel. Now decide what answer I shall return to him who sent me. And David said, I am in great distress. Let me fall into the hand of the Lord, for his mercy is very great. But don't let me fall into the hand of man. He picks the one where God is in control. That's why he picked the one. Otherwise, he's at the mercy of his enemies, and God's mercy is greater. So he picks that one. Look at verse 14. So the Lord sent a pestilence on Israel. 70,000 men fall dead. And God sent the angel to Jerusalem to destroy it. But as he was about to destroy it, the Lord saw, and he relented from the calamity. And he said to the angel who was working destruction, It is enough. Now stay your hand. That command was to stop the pestilence, the killing based on the plague. The Lord's like, that's enough. Okay? And the angel of the Lord was standing by where? At the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite. And David lifted his eyes and saw the angel of the Lord standing between earth and standing between heaven, and in his hand a drawn sword stretched out over Jerusalem. Imagine this scene. This is why I picked the Chronicles version rather than Samuel, by the way, because you can see the spiritual warfare in Chronicles. Remember, Chronicles is God's view on what's happening. Samuel is more boots on the ground. It completely misses what's going on in the air. So there's an angel standing with a sword drawn between heaven and earth over Jerusalem on the threshing floor. And David says to the elders, clothed in sackcloth, fell upon their faces. And David said to God, was it not I who gave command to number the people? It is I who have sinned and done great evil. But these sheep, what have they done? Please let your hand, O Lord my God, be against me and against my father's house. Do not let the plague be on your people. Notice that the angel, not the one who stopped the plague, but the one who's standing there with a sword between heaven and earth on the threshing floor, does not move in sympathy. He doesn't leave. He stays put. But look at the next verse. The angel, the one with the sword, the angel of the Lord, commanded Gad, remember, the messenger, to tell David that David should go up and raise an altar to the Lord on the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite. What does the angel do? I can't leave. Justice. So he whispers in the ear of the prophet, tell David to build an altar. Hurry up. Mercy. He gives him the answer key. Build an altar. Isn't that rad? I'm not leaving. I'm not going anywhere. You can cry all you want, you big crybaby. There's no sympathy that moves me. Justice stands, but he tells David how to get out of it. Go build an altar. Isn't that cool? So David went up at Gad's word, which he had spoken in the name of the Lord. Now Ornan was threshing wheat. The threshing floors. We're going to talk about. I'm actually going to show you a bunch of pictures so we can visualize. But the threshing floor, okay? He turned, Ornan did, and saw the angel, and his 4 sons who were with him took off and hid themselves. Yeah, they're just busy farming, doing the threshing thing. All of a sudden they look up, and there's a huge angel with a sword, and they're like, bing! Leaves Dad all by himself. That sounds right. Verse 21, so David came to Ornan. Ornan looked and saw David and went out from the threshing floor and paid homage to David with his face on the ground. Here's the thing. This guy is a Jebusite. We're going to talk about this in depth next week. I hope you guys come back. We're going to talk about the topography and where all this is and how it applies to us and all this stuff. But he's on the threshing floor of the Jebusite. Remember, Joab shimmied up the water shaft and took Jebus, who belonged to the Gentiles for a long time, remember? And David claimed it as Jerusalem, but these people still live there, and he owns the threshing floor in the middle of what is now Jerusalem, you see, up behind where David built his palace. And he's out there on the threshing floor, okay? On Mount Moriah. Write that down. We're totally not going to talk about it tonight, but that's a teaser for next week. It's on Mount Moriah. It's very important. Write that down. Teaser. Now you have to come back. There might not be cake, but there's Mount Moriah, so it's fine. He turned. Okay, we already saw that. The boys ran away. Okay, where are we? I do not know. What? Verse 22. David said to Ornan, give me the side of the threshing floor that I may build on it an altar to the Lord. Give it to me at its full price, that the plague may be averted from the people. Ornan said to David, I'm kind of weirded out that you're here and he's here. I mean, imagine, how often does the king go to the threshing floor? Never. How often is there an angel with a sword standing at the threshing floor? Not maybe last Tuesday, okay? He's totally weirded out by this, and he tells David, take it. Just take it, right? And let my lord the king do what seems good to him. I have oxen for burnt offering, and I have the threshing tools. I've got everything you need. You literally don't have to go to the store. You can have it all. I've got wood. I've got wheat. I've got it all. I'm giving it to you. I give it all. But King David said, this is a killer verse. I know you guys know this. No, but I will buy them for the full price. I will not take for the Lord what is yours, nor offer burnt offerings that cost me nothing. That's such a classic verse. David's like, no way. It's got to cost me something. So David paid Ornan 600 shekels of gold by weight for the site. He ended up actually paying some census tax. Not for 1.5 million. But he did put some serious cash down for this altar. And David built there an altar to the Lord and presented burnt offerings and peace offerings and called on the Lord. And the Lord answered him with fire from heaven upon the altar of burnt offering. Then the Lord commanded the angel, and he put his sword back into the sheath. That's awesome. Isn't this like the best story you've ever read? That's awesome. The Lord totally, he blessed that sacrifice. He put his stamp of approval on that sacrifice. He lit that place up. And the angel's like, that'll do. And sheathed his sword. Amazing. Paid in full. Amazing. The altar. It's really tempting to go into it. We're not, because I'm going to split it in half, because next week it's going to be the altar is what it's called. So I'm going to talk about everything about the altar next week, I promise. But it stayed the plague, right? The altar. That's totally the gospel, for sure, right? So next week we're going to kill it. We're going to tackle it. This week I want to focus on the threshing floor. Okay, the threshing floor. All of this happened on the threshing floor, you guys. It's brutal. That's going to be the word of the night. So here is a first century threshing floor. They're everywhere in Israel. They're all over the place. They're up on hills, usually because you need a breeze that blows through to do the work. And so you'll see them up on a hill. So these are always out in the open where there would be a cross breeze to help out, because what they did is they put all the stalks of wheat on the ground. Step one is they'd get a donkey and they would pull this threshing sledge behind, and I'm going to show you a picture in a minute, and this donkey is going to go round and round and round and crush the wheat, just obliterate it, embedded with rocks and stones and everything sharp, okay? That's what the underside of this wood looks like. So this donkey goes round and round and just starts crushing the life out of these stalks, okay? And it goes around for a while, and then they would take a winnowing fork and they'd chuck it in the air, okay, violently, toss it in the air lots of times, okay, like that. And then they would sieve it. This is a sifter. They would sift it through. I mean, it's violent. Everything's violent. Lots of big movements, lots of like shaking and threshing and throwing and all this stuff. And then the wind would catch the chaff, which would blow away like dust, and all the fruit, the grain, would fall back to the earth, and then they would collect it. Okay, that's the threshing floor. So these guys are out there, and it's hard work. They've got all this wheat and all this threshing and all this going on. The threshing floor, where we are mutilated, you guys. We often find ourselves on the threshing floor in really hard places. The threshing floor is a stop on all believers' journey with the Lord. Sometimes multiple trips to the threshing floor, or maybe it feels like you never really get out of the threshing floor. It just keeps coming and pummels you. The threshing floor is a process of refinement and atonement. The threshing floor. We are much like a stalk of wheat. Crushed, tossed, beaten, trampled, abused on the threshing floor. If you feel that you are a stalk of wheat under the hooves of a donkey, you probably are. Encouraging word. Thank you. That's why I'm here. The threshing floor. It's just the truth. And to think that there is not a threshing floor means that you will be scandalized when you are on the threshing floor. So I'm trying to help you out. Threshing floor. Question, but how do we get there on the threshing floor? How does one find themselves on the threshing floor? And is there a purpose, or is it just downright mean? Because it feels that way sometimes. Just mean, brutal. Sometimes our stupidity puts us on the threshing floor, like David. David is on the threshing floor of sin's consequence. A census. Pride. Self-glorification. He ends up on the threshing floor. He is a mess because once again, David is entangled in sin. He was nearly obliterated by this sin had the Lord not shown him great mercy. And he ended up on the threshing floor. Horrible. Brutal, you guys. But the question is sin the only scenario that lands you on the threshing floor? Like, if I mind my P's and Q's, can I avoid the threshing floor? No, you can't. The threshing floor of sin's consequence is just one threshing floor. There are many threshing floors. Like, consider Job's threshing floor. Job's threshing floor of Satan's target. Satan wanted Job. You think he's all that in a bag of chips? Just watch what happens if I mess with him for a while, right? Remember that? Was he in sin? No. About 40 chapters get you there to the that it was not because Job did anything wrong. Remember, that was the whole debate with his stupid friends. You must have done something wrong for like forever, right? Satan had his number, like at the DMV. Job's number got pulled. That's what happened. And he was nearly obliterated by his trials. And it was bam, 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 like in an hour. Remember that? Before the servants could even leave, another tragedy came. And then another tragedy. Each one of them would have done Job in by themselves. And God left his wife alive. Which was another trial in itself. The sisters were on the threshing floor of sickness and death. Why weren't you here? Remember that? Why did you delay? If you had only been here, They cried out to Jesus, who was supposed to be their friend. And their brother Lazarus died. The threshing floor. Blindside. Brutal. How about Joseph? Joseph was on the threshing floor of betrayal. Betrayal, you guys. Thrown in a pit, sold into slavery, wrongly accused, and then shackled in an Egyptian prison. Threshing. Brutal. It's brutal. How about the boys in the fire of persecution? That was a threshing floor, right? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who had been pulled out of the only home they knew in Jerusalem, marched 500 miles away to that superpower under King Nebi, who turned into a cow, and they stand there 3 in a million by themselves among Judeans who bowed their knee. And they said no and ended up in the furnace. Brutal. Threshing, you see. Like these who have gone before us, there are days where we look at the Lord and say, what the heck? I literally was minding my own business, and I ended up on the threshing floor. Anybody else? No, just me. Okay, by myself? Okay, thank you.
Here's 2 right here.
It's like, wham! Like that. Right? It makes you wonder, really does. You ask the Lord and you're very sincere, and maybe you have to take a minute and walk to the woods so that you can tell him how you feel and say, what? Did I do something wrong that I didn't know about? Because I'm in this trial. Is it because I sinned? Because that's kind of how we go. Because it's like I must have done something wrong. That's not always true. Search your heart and see. But it's not true always. Did God put me here? Did Satan put me in the threshing floor? Job. What happened, you see? Have you ever felt like you've been lifted off your feet, whirled around in a tornado, and then like dropped hard on the threshing floor and went, what just happened? One day, I was getting donuts for the church.
Oh, yeah. Go back to the dark chocolate piece.
The next thing I knew, it was 3 weeks later, and I was waking up in the CCU at Asante going, what happened? What happened? I was at church, walking to the sanctuary, and I woke up in hell. That's the truth. I found out I had died 87 times in my chart. My liver had been lacerated, and I completely bled out and died 2 more times. My kidneys died. They thought I was brain dead. They were really worried about that. All this stuff happened. It's just a really long story. But I woke up. The first memory I have is 3 weeks later. What happened? I'm on a ventilator. I can't walk. I can't talk. What happened? And for every minute of every hour for the next 2 weeks that I was in the CCU going through horrific, brutal, horrible threshing floor things, wondering why the Lord is actually having me alive, I think heaven would have been better. I wondered why, you see. Threshing floor. I don't have heart problems. Okay? Turns out I did. Turns out I had a very, very rare heart condition that dropped me dead at church. Rude. It's mean and it's brutal, and it does not make sense. 35 years old that day. We were in the middle of Ruth Bible study, for crying out loud. It was really going fine. And you wonder, what happened? Why? You literally have held my heart together for 35 years. Why now? Why? And then to learn that every heartbeat, every day, every breath for the rest of my life is completely dependent on the Lord. Fragile, yeah. Had some scares since. And every day I walk with a limp, with a pacemaker. That better work. We've tested that out a couple times. It's scary, you guys, is what I'm saying. It really is. And every day, you were just talking about this, is the day the Lord has made. Birthdays are cool. I'm happy to make it to the next hour. That is the reality of where the Lord has me on this journey that I'm in. It's a gift, and it's scary all at the same time. The threshing floor, you guys. It really is scary. It's just like, bam! What happened? Here's the thing. This room is full of stories where we could write our name on the stone wall of a threshing floor. Been like, I was here. In fact, maybe every week you can go back and be like, here again. Still here. Right? The threshing floor. The threshing floor where chaff is blown away and where what remains falls back to earth. And what remains that falls back to earth is fruitful. And it's good. And it's nourishing. And it's life. That's the truth. What fruit? What good? What good comes from the threshing floor? Well, let's go back to our characters that we looked at. This is just pulling some out of the air. Almost every character went to the threshing floor, right? What about Job? Job, okay? He went through so much. And at the end of it, one of the sweetest verses, this is one of the first verses the Lord gave me when I was conscious enough to read something. One of the first things he gave me, and I never understood this, at the very end of Job, the very last chapter, like 12 verses from the end, Job looks in the mirror and he looks at the Lord and he says, look, I have heard of you. I have heard of you, but I've never seen you like this. My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. I know the Lord. I love the Lord. I follow the Lord. I think I understand the Lord. And then you go through something with the Lord on the threshing floor and you say, now I see you. My walk has never been clearer. Now I see you. Trials do that. Threshing floor does that. It's a refinement of your walk, you see. What about the girls? Jesus is holding, weeping Mary in his arms, and he's crying too because his friend died. And he turns to the girls and says, this sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. That's fruit. No, you're on the threshing floor so that my glory will shine. You see, Joseph, his brothers realize who he is at the end of his story in Genesis. And they're horrified that Joseph's alive and know who they are and is this whole thing, right? And he looks at them and says, you intended me harm, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. Joseph in the famine. Nah, you intended me harm. God intended it for good. You see, it's fruit. The 3 boys were joined in the flames by Jesus himself and rescued in powerful testimony to the greatness of Jehovah. And they said this to Nebuchadnezzar's face: if we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us on this side of earth or the next. Oh, I'm going to be delivered. You can chuck me in there. I may not make it out, but mark my words, I am delivered. That's bold. It really is. Even David, who is there because of sin, right? Is it redeemable? I understand Job and Joseph and all these saints, whatever. Went through all this stuff. They were just fine and then whatever. Good for them. I actually did something wrong and I'm on the threshing floor. Is it redeemable? Turn, if you would, to Luke chapter 22. Flip over there. I wasn't going to do this, but we have time, and I think it's important. Luke chapter 22. Get your pencils out. I want you to mark something. Sin and the threshing floor. Does it have fruit? Do you have to be Job and Joseph and the 3 boys and everybody's perfect on the threshing floor? Good for you. I actually messed up. David messed up. Peter messed up. Check this out. Luke chapter 22, verse 31. Simon, Simon, behold, Satan demanded to have you, that he may sift you like wheat. Threshing floor, right? But this is one of my favorite buts of the Bible. But I have prayed for you. You guys, I have prayed for you that your faith may not fail. Yeah, you're on the threshing floor. Yeah, you're going to be tempted, Peter. But I have prayed for you that your faith would remain, and when you have turned again in repentance, strengthen your brothers. He gives him a job after redemption. Peter says, there ain't no way I'm doing that. I'll go to death with you. And Jesus says, listen to me. Before the night ends, you're going to deny me to a little kid at a fire. You're going to be tempted, Peter, and you're going to give in. God knew that. He can't stop the temptation. It's already coming like a freight train. And God knows Peter is not going to make it. But he says, listen to me. Satan desires to sift you, but I have prayed for you that your faith will endure. And when I turn you around, Peter, and you will, strengthen your brothers. And that's what he does for the rest of his life. Check this out. Write this down. Mark in your Bible. Actually, it's better. 2 things, really quick. Satan demanded to have you. That you is plural. Write that down. Satan demanded to have you. He turns this from just talking to Peter. In this moment, he says, Satan demands to have you, boys. All 12 are standing there. Check it out. That he may sift you like wheat. But I have prayed for you, singular. Satan demands to have you, kids, all of you. But I have prayed for you individually, one-on-one, temptation by temptation, that your faith would make it through and that you would stand strong, not as a group, by name, you and you and you and you. Listen, the truth is, corporately, Satan's after you. He's got your number. Some of you will endure it, some of you will fall, but I will pray for you. It's okay. Peter got a gift. He knew ahead of time, I'm going to mess this up. Jesus told me. And still at the fire, he's like, dang, this is ringing a bell. No. It doesn't ring a bell. Satan knew how to get him. I'm going to pray that your faith will endure it, Peter. And listen, I'm going to give you a ministry in the mess. Afterwards, strengthen your brothers. It's not the end. Peter was only stronger after this. You, singular, I have prayed for you, you see. It's really powerful. David, his fruit, he's atoned on the threshing floor in a refiner's fire. The dross was consumed out and fruit fell back to the ground, and there he worshiped the Most High, and that consuming fire burnt it up. You see, and he says, I will not offer burnt offerings to the Lord my God that costs me nothing. Fruit. I know for a fact that God makes dead hearts beat and dead lungs breathe, because he said, I am the resurrection and the life. Here's the thing, at salvation and every day, he does that for every believers. All of our dead hearts beat and our dead lungs breathe. Redemption, salvation, he is the author of life. I am the resurrection and life. That is our testimony, the threshing floor. Whatever threshing you endure today, tomorrow, learn to build an altar on the threshing floor. Don't wait till you get out of the threshing floor. David did not leave. He would not leave that place until there was a place of worship there. Worship him in the threshing floor. In the midst of the threshing floor, build an altar. Worship him now for what he is going to do when you get out of the threshing floor. You may be there a minute. Worship him in the threshing floor. You may not understand how you got there. You may not understand why you're going through it. I think it's honest to say that. But the King is praying for you. And it's always, always, every time for your good and for his glory. Every time. No matter what. No matter what got you there. There are many threshing floors. Every single one is still for your good and for his glory. Satan demands to sift you like wheat, but I have prayed for you by